The gun went up before the man could finish drawing breath. Not the hand of the shooter, the hand of the man holding the dirt up to it. He held out a clod of earth the color of dried blood, and he pointed at the heart of it. There, in the seam where two kinds of stone met, was a thin vein of silver so bright you could read the sun off it. You have seen men try to sell a lie. You have never seen a man try to sell 100 acres of dirt he bet his life upon. It was the spring of the great land rush, with thousands running down from the borders into the open western territories. Most of the good homesteads went to men who had nerve and horses and a cousin already on the line. Elias Merrick had none of these. He had a borrowed wagon, a thin mare with a limp, and the quiet stubbornness of a man who had been told he was a fool his entire life and had decided, long ago, that he would keep being one until he was finished. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Wherever it is, we are glad for the company. Elias was 41 years old when he climbed off that wagon at the foot of his new claim. He was not a big man. He did not ride well. He spoke so rarely that the men he worked beside on the rail crews had made a game of counting his silent days. They had counted 7 once and bragged about it at the saloon. He had staked the worst parcel in the high desert valley because every other parcel was already being fought over by men with more money than him, more family than him, and more guns than him. Elias had one claim of his own, a piece of land he had chosen by walking out into the scrub on a Tuesday, with no marker and no sign, just because the silence at that spot felt, to him, like something finished. That was how he had spoken about it to himself, where the silence felt finished. His neighbors on every side were already drawing up plans. To the east, a cattle family with 3 sons and a brand new barn was laying in barbed wire. To the north, a former sheriff with connections to a freight company was already pouring a foundation. Elias marked his corners with broken bottle glass that caught the light at dawn. He dug a well by hand for 9 days. He built a sod dugout into the hillside so the wind would not eat it. He planted nothing that year, because there was no water enough for anything to live above ground. The other settlers laughed at him. They came by on horseback and shouted encouragement down into his dugout that was not encouragement at all. They laughed because the plain beneath his notch was brown and brittle and looked like it had been bleached. They laughed because his well came up brackish and slow. They laughed because he had been the only man to claim in that quadrant, and they remembered the moment he had walked out to his ground and stood for an hour, looking down, before planting his stake. Cassius Barlow was not a settler. Cassius Barlow was the kind of man settlers wrote letters about. He had the bank in town, 2 ranches, 3 mining interests across the western ranges, and a voice that told you what to think before you knew what you were thinking. He had come west in a wagon of his own 20 years earlier, but he had come inside it. He had clerks. He had partners in the bigger cities. He had a foreman named Wallach with eyes like a butcher and a way of looking at a man that made the man understand he was already smaller than he had been. Barlow had tried, in the spring of that year, to acquire Elias's land for $60. He had sent a clerk with the offer and a paper to sign. Elias had read the paper on his dugout step. He had read it twice, though he already knew what it said. Then he had torn it carefully, down the middle, and handed the clerk back his own 2 halves. That was a thing Elias had not planned. He had not rehearsed it. He had simply, quietly, decided he was done. Now, sitting in the dust outside his dugout in the last light of a long day, he watched the mare slow drink at the trough, and he did not feel like a man who had done anything brave. He felt like a man who had run out of rooms inside himself and was, at last, standing in the open. The land rush had given him 100 acres of nothing, and he had decided to stay on it. It was the kind of decision that looks, from the outside, like very little. In town the next morning, he went in for supplies. He bought flour, salt, a small tin of coffee, and a packet of seed for a garden that might not live. He stopped at the surveyor's office because a man had told him the line of his claim was wrong and he wanted to see, with his own eyes, what the paper said. The surveyor, a thin man named Albright who washed his hands at a basin in the corner, laid out the parish map and ran a finger along the boundary. Then he stopped. "You have a curious parcel, Mr. Merrick." "I have a parcel," Elias said. "Yes, sir. You have a curious parcel." Albright ran his finger from the corner post up through the body of the claim and down again. "Does this look like nothing to you?" "It looked like nothing to me last October," Elias said. "It is not nothing." Albright lowered his voice. I cannot say more in this office. Come back after hours. Elias came back after hours. Albright had locked the door. He had laid out, on his desk, 3 pieces of polished stone and a hand lens. He set the lens down on the desk between them, the way a doctor sets down a tool before showing a patient what they have been carrying. My father worked the silver strikes near the ranges 30 years ago, Albright said. I have spent a quarter-century reading ground. Look here. He placed one of the stones under the lens and tilted the lamp. Elias bent. Inside the stone, in thin lines that ran through it like the veins of a leaf, was what looked, to a man who had not seen it before, like a kind of fever. Bright hairline cracks of pale metal set against the duller rock. This is what comes out of the earth, Albright said. You are telling me there is silver under my land. I am telling you there is the kind of stone, in the right light, in the right wet, that leans the way silver leans when it is underneath. Does it run? It runs as far as I can tell, Mr. Merrick. It runs in such a way that a man might, if he had $1,000 and the nerve to start, build something that lasts longer than a barn. Elias did not say anything for several minutes. He stood looking at the stone under the lens, then at the lamp, then at the closed curtains. He thought of every settlement he had passed through, every claim he had stood beside, every signature he had given a man who had not deserved it. He thought of how, in school, the other boys had broken his pencils because he used them too slowly. He thought of his mother, who had died certain he would amount to no more than a hired hand. How do I hold it? He asked at last. You do not know what you are asking me. I am asking you to tell me how I hold it. By being on it. By standing on it for the next 13 months without selling, without signing, without accepting help from anyone with money. By keeping your name on the register in Guthrie as the lawful claimant. By sleeping under that dirt every night and trusting it. By not telling a soul who does not love you. What do you think you would have done, sitting where Elias sat? Would you have told a soul? Would you have signed the paper? Would you, perhaps, have been tempted by $60? He walked home the way he had walked in, by a longer road. He did not tell anyone. He did not, for one moment, think about selling. What he thought about, instead, was a woman named Ruth Calloway who lived at the edge of his claim in a single-room cabin that had no floor, only the hard earth beaten by her feet. Ruth was 38. Her husband had been a man named Leland Calloway who had gone chasing silver on a rumor in another territory and come home with the wrong kind of silver, fever. He had died on a cot with his boots on and his mouth open and his hands folded over a paper map that no longer meant what it had meant the week before. Their daughter, Lily, was 7. She had been born small and had stayed small. She did not speak to strangers. She spoke to the dogs, the horses, the lambs, and to her mother in a voice that was so quiet you had to sit beside her to hear it. Ruth had come out west with her husband in a hurry. She had stayed after his death because she had nowhere quicker to go. She had built, with the things the neighbors had left for her at the fence, flour, salt, a barrel, a tattered quilt, a life she did not believe in but had not yet thrown away. She did not like Elias. She did not dislike him. She tolerated him because he did not speak, and a man who does not speak leaves the air clearer for a woman whose husband had spoken too much and lied too often. Lily, however, did not tolerate him. Lily loved him. She loved him because he had once, without ceremony, taken a splinter out of her heel and had not remarked on it. He had simply done it and handed her back her shoe and walked away. Lily took the act as a kind of scripture. One evening, 2 months after his visit to Albright, Elias knocked on the Calloway door with 3 biscuits wrapped in a cloth. Ruth took them without thanks. He stood for a moment, the way he always did, before speaking. I will be on my own land every night through the winter, he said. If something goes wrong for you, you will find me on that land. If something goes wrong for me, you will find me on that land. You do not have to believe me. You only have to know. Ruth did not answer. She looked past his shoulder for a long moment, then closed the door. He walked home in the dark. He was not a man who trusted easily. He had learned, in the long years before the land rush, that trust was a coin you spent once and could not get back. But that night, walking the long way home, he thought of Lily, small, quiet, born too soon, raised in the wrong cabin, and he knew the coin was worth it. In December, the wind came down from the north in strips that tore the dust from the road and laid it on the walls of the dugout floor by floor. The neighbors east and north had already gone into town for the winter, leaving their barns open to the weather. The land looked, to any man who passed through, like a place you would walk past. Cassius Barlow had not walked past. He had spent the autumn in the larger ranges, returning to the eastern banks in November to study the parish maps at his own ends. He had read that Elias had not signed. He read this the way other men read the weather, as something to be overcome. In January, Barlow sent Wallach. Wallach arrived at the dugout on a Thursday at noon. He had with him 2 men on horseback and a paper of his own. Elias read it on the dugout step, as he had read the other one. It said, in the smooth language clerks use, that Elias's claim had been deemed abandoned and was forfeit to the territorial bank, with interest, for the sum of unpaid back fees that Elias did not owe. It was a forgery so clean it almost sang. "You will sign today?" Wallach said. "I will not." "You will." "The marshal in town is a man who eats at Mr. Barlow's table." "Then I will eat alone," Elias said. Wallach raised his hand, and one of the riders stepped down. Wallach's hand stayed up. He was watching Elias. He was watching to see whether the man's eyes would flinch, whether the blood would leave his face, whether he would, like so many men before him, calculate what would be lost if he did not sign. Elias did not flinch. He sat on the step and did not move except to fold the paper in half and hand it back. "Take this to Mr. Barlow," he said. "Tell him he is welcome to try the other parcels in this quarter. Mine is not for sale at any price, and not for taking at any hand." Wallach looked at him for a long moment. Then Wallach laughed. It was the laugh of a man who has seen many men sit where Elias sat and has signed every one of them. "You'll sign by spring," he said. "I will not sign by spring," Elias said. And the truth is, in the weeks that followed, it looked like Wallach was right. The bank's lawyers sent 3 more papers. The local sheriff came up the road and read the claim aloud from his horse. A man named Peterson, who had married Barlow's niece, offered to buy the dugout improvements for $300 and pretended it was a kindness. Elias sent each man away in the same way, in 2 or 3 quiet sentences, and went back to his work. He dug a second well, deeper, in a different spot. He found water. He found not clean water, not sweet water, but water, and he thanked the ground for it in his own way, which was to put his palms flat on it for several minutes at a time, twice a day. In February, Ruth came down the road one morning with Lily. She stood at the corner post of his claim and waited. "I heard you did not sign," she said. "I did not sign," he said. "You are going to die on this land." "I am going to live on this land," he said. She looked at him for a long moment with the weather behind her, then at Lily, then back at him. "I am going to bring Lily up here on Saturdays," she said. "You are welcome to bring her up here any day," he said. Ruth did not, in fact, come on Saturdays. She came on Wednesdays and on Sundays and on any day in between. By March, she was splitting her firewood on his chopping block. By April, Lily was feeding the mare from her small hand. By May, Ruth had quietly moved half her belongings up to the dugout, in 2 trips, without ceremony, and Elias had not asked about it. If this story has been moving you, you are exactly who we tell it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. In the early summer, Albright sent word through a boy that the rains had washed out enough of the eastern bank to expose a face of rock that nobody in the territory had seen before. There, along a seam of river-cut stone, a man could see. If a man knew what to see, if a man had spent his life looking at stone the way some men look at cattle or horses or coin, that the silver ran for 2 miles. It ran through his land. It ran under the dugout. It ran under Ruth's cabin. It ran under the trough where the mare drank. It had been there, beneath them, all through the winter. Elias walked the long property line with Albright in the cool of the morning. The surveyor carried a leather notebook and a small hammer. He stopped at intervals and broke the surface of the rock and held each piece up to the sun. He marked each place on his map with a single pressed circle. "You are sitting on more than most men will own in 3 lifetimes," Albright said. "I do not want most of what most men own," Elias said. "That is what makes you the rightful owner of it." He did not tell Ruth that day. He told her 3 days later, on a Sunday, over coffee, with Lily drawing pictures in the dust between them. He told her because Albright had told him to tell someone who loved him. He had spent those 3 days deciding who loved him, and he had decided on Ruth and Lily, and he had asked himself, for a long time, whether the word applied, and then he had decided that it did. Ruth did not say a word for several minutes. She sat at the table with her hands folded, and she did not look at him. I lost my Leland to a vein like this one, she said at last. I know. He went chasing what was underneath. He never came home. I am not chasing it, Elias said. It is underneath me. I am going to stand on it. You are going to stand on it, she said. Are you going to let it kill you too? It will not kill me. It will have to come through you first. She looked at him. She saw, for the first time, what was in the man who had been sitting on her neighbor's claim all winter. Not a quiet man, not a weak man, but a still one. If anything moves against you, she said, you will tell me before it arrives. I will, he said. He told her. Then, the particular thing about Cassius Barlow. Wallach came back in June, with 4 riders this time, at dawn. Elias was outside splitting wood. He set the axe down with the handle still in his hand. Wallach came up to the chopping block and laid a paper on it, a different paper with a heavier seal, with a signature from a judge whose name Elias did not recognize. The paper said, in language that pretended to be plain, that the parcel was forfeit by law and that any man found on it after noon would be removed by force. Elias looked at the paper. He set it down on the block. You will leave now, he said, and you will not come back. If Mr. Barlow wishes to speak to me, he may do it in the surveyor's office with 2 of his men and 2 of mine and the parish book between us. I am not here to bring you to an office. Then you are here to do something you will regret for the rest of your life. He had not raised his voice. He had not moved his feet. He had spoken the way a man speaks who is no longer interested in being smaller than the conversation. Wallach looked at him for a long moment. Then Wallach's hand went to the hammer at his belt. What happened next did not happen loud. It happened the way a season changes. Ruth came around the corner of the dugout with the shotgun she had borrowed from a neighbor 3 months earlier and had kept wrapped in a blanket behind the door. Lily was asleep inside. Ruth had been awake since 4. She had been awake since the autumn, in fact. She had been waking up at 4 to learn how a woman becomes the kind of wife who can hold a household through a storm. She did not point the gun at anyone. She set it down on the chopping block beside the paper and the axe head. She looked at Wallach. If he goes, she said, you have to go through me first, and then through the parish, and then through the man with the notary seal who wrote down my name on this claim last October as the lawful wife of the man who holds it. The paper you have there was not signed by him. What is your name? Wallach asked. Ruth Calloway Merrick, by the grace of God and the clerk in Guthrie, as of March last. The riders looked at Wallach. Wallach looked at the gun being nowhere and being everywhere. He looked at Elias's face, which had not changed. He looked at the dirt under his boots, which had, for the first time, a kind of weight to it that could not be ignored. This is not over, Wallach said. It is over for today, Ruth said. It will be over for good before the summer is out. You can come back at any time. We will be here. Wallach went. The 4 riders went. The paper stayed on the chopping block, where Ruth put it under a stone, and where Elias, that evening, read it a 4th time and then put it in a drawer with all the others. In August, Albright filed the survey. He filed it with the parish, with the territorial bank, with the federal land office in Guthrie. He filed it as a registered load claim. He filed it in the names of Elias Merrick and Ruth Merrick, joint tenants. He filed it because he had told Elias, the previous summer, that he did this only for the men he believed in, and because he believed in Elias, and because he had decided in March, when he had seen Ruth come down the road at dawn, that he believed in both of them. In September, the federal mining inspector arrived from the east with 3 men and a carload of instruments. He set up on the eastern rise. He sank a shaft. He broke the first piece himself with Elias's hammer and held it up to the light of 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. And there in the seam, bright, hairline, undeniable, was the vein. Barlow came that afternoon. He came with Wallach and with 2 lawyers and with a face that did not yet know what it would have to learn. He came up to the chopping block and sat down in the chair that had been left there and looked at Ruth. Ma'am, he said, how much will you take? We will not take, Ruth said. We have taken. Your surveyor has filed an irregular claim. Our surveyor has filed the proper claim, and the federal inspector has verified it, and the parish register carries my name beside his. The bank cannot touch it. Your clerks cannot touch it. You cannot touch it. Not at any hand. Barlow looked at her for a long moment. He had spoken to many men in his life and had never met the woman he could not, in the end, speak around. You will not enjoy the next season, he said. We have not enjoyed the last 4, Ruth said. We expect to enjoy the 5th more than the 4th, and the 6th more than the 5th, and we expect to keep enjoying it after you have left the territory, which we expect will be in the spring." Barlow stood. He did not sign anything. He left the chopping block and walked to his horse and rode down the road. Wallach rode behind him. The two lawyers followed in a separate rig. None of them said a word for the first mile of the road home. The federal inspector's report was published in November. 3 days later, the Territorial Bank recalled every note Cassius Barlow had personally guaranteed against the parish. 3 of his mining interests went into receivership by February. His flagship ranch, to the east, was sold at auction for a quarter of what he had poured into it. The man he had kept at the local sheriff's table was voted out by the spring of the following year. By summer, Barlow had moved east into a smaller house in a quieter town. He had kept his name. He had kept almost nothing else. On the morning of the first snowfall of that winter, Elias and Ruth stood at the window of the small house they had built, in the spring, on the place where the dugout had been. Lily sat between them on a stool, eating bread and honey. The room smelled of pine and soap and coffee. The fire was good. The window faced west. Lily, after finishing her bread, climbed down from the stool and walked out into the yard, where the snow was already an inch deep. She bent down and picked up a piece of rock from the path, where Elias had been splitting firewood the day before. She held it up to her father. "What is this inside it?" she asked. "That, little one," he said, "is what comes out of the earth." "Is it ours?" "It is ours. It is yours, after your mother and me. It will keep. It is the kind that keeps." She turned the rock in her hand. The snow fell on it and did not melt. Inside the rock, in thin, bright lines, was the vein, and around it, in deeper lines, was the rest of the story. If you are still listening, you are one of the ones who knows that some kinds of dirt are not dirt at all. Next, we will tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a frontier ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind cattleman who could sense her worth the moment she stepped off the wagon. Until then, leave us a comment telling us whose stillness you recognized most in Elias, and we will see you on the trail.